Hi guys, I am Lil. In this video, I am going to give you some knowledge about bones. Let's start from the word bone. What it is. A bone is a specialized connective tissue made up of cells, fibers and matrix. There are many types of connective tissues. The bone is one of the specialized connective tissue. Let's think the bone is living or non-living. If it is living, what are the reasons or proof? The reasons are it can grow, it produces blood cells which are living cells, and it can be infected and it can heal after a fracture. So these are the reasons which prove that bone is a living tissue. Now, why or how the bones is stronger and hard? It is due to the calcification of bone. Calcification means deposition of calcium in extracellular matrix, and the bone has a slight range of flexibility. This flexibility is due to the presence of organic fibers called collagens. Now the next one is bones are exist in two forms. One is compact bone and another one is spongy bone. Now let's see the features of compact bone and spongy bones. Compact bone, it is dense in structure and solid mass. Spongy bone is not a dense mass. It is made up of branching network of trabeculae. Trabeculae is nothing but a mesh-like network of small bones with pores. The pores of spongy bones contain bone marrow. The compact bone has regular arrangement of trabeculae in a parallel manner, and the compact bone is found in the cortex of shaft of long bones. The spongy bones are found in the ends of long bones and in some flat bones and in another irregular bones also. Now let's see different types of bones. This classification is based on general shape of the bone. The long bone, short bone, irregular bones, flat bones, pneumatic bones and sesamoid bone. The long bone will have an elongated shaft and two expanded ends. The shaft typically have three surface and three borders. It will have a central medullary cavity inside. This shaft will have a hole called nutrient foramen. Most of the long bones are present in the limbs such as humerus, radius, ulna, femur, tibia and fibula. And some miniature long bones will have one expanded end only, like metacarpals, metatarsals and phalanges. There are some modified long bones. They don't have medullary cavity. Example, clavicle. Next, short bones. Short bones are cuboidal in shape, and it is made up of spongy bone inside and surrounded by a layer of strong compact bone as outer covering. The examples for spongy bones are carpals and tarsal bones. The next, flat bones. Flat bones are plate-like structure. The bone is made up of middle spongy bone with outer and inner layer of compact bone. They will resemble a sandwich. The middle content are spongy bone and the upper and lower bread are compared to compact bones. They are mostly found in the skull bones, and one more example is scapula. Next, the irregular bones. Irregular bones does not have a particular structure. They are composed of a thin shell of compact bone with an interior made up of spongy or cancellous bone. They are found in vertebral column, hip bones and skull bones. Next, sesamoid bone. They are bony nodules which are embedded in tendon or joint capsule. These bones do not present at birth. They will form after birth by ossification. They will form in tendon where they rub against a bones. The sesamoid bones will reduce the friction by hyaline cartilage which are cover their contact surface. Examples, patella, pisiform and fabella. Next, pneumatic bones. Some irregular bones contain large airspace cavity, and the inner surface of this airspace cavity lined by epithelium. These bones made the skull lightweight and help in resonance of voice and act as air conditioning chamber for the inspired air. Examples for the pneumatic bones are maxilla, sphenoid, and ethmoid. Now let's see the parts of an adult bone. There are two major parts. One is shaft and the other is ends of long bones. The shaft is also called diaphysis and the end is also called epiphysis. The shaft has outer periosteum, which is a covering layer, and the middle cortex, which is made up of compact bone, and the inner medullary cavity. Periosteum, it is a fibrous membrane covering the surface of bone. The periosteum has two layers. The inner layer is cellular and the outer layer is fibrous. The inner layer, cellular layer, is osteogenic in nature. The periosteum attached to the bone surface by sharpy fibers. Periosteum cover the whole shaft, but in articulating surface of the ends of bone, it continues with the joint capsules. It won't cover the articulating surface of the ends. Next, the cortex. It is made up of compact bone which help the bone to withstand the mechanical strains. And the medullary cavity. It is a cavity inside the cortex of shaft which is filled with bone marrow. The bone marrow is red before the puberty and after the puberty it is yellow bone marrow. Red bone marrow are active in hemopoiesis. They will produce RBC cells, but yellow bone marrow don't have power of hemopoiesis. Then the two ends. The ends of a long bone is made up of spongy or cancellous bone. The articulating surface of ends are covered by hyaline cartilage. Now let's see the parts of young bones which does not complete their ossification yet. The parts are epiphysis, epiphyseal plates, metaphysis and diaphysis. Epiphysis. The two ends of long bones are called epiphysis, which involved in articulation with other bones. These epiphyses are different types based on their formation. First one, pressure epiphysis. The end of long bone developed due to pressure on the end. This end involved in weight transmission and it is covered by hyaline cartilage to articulate with other bones. Example, the head of femur and humerus. Next, traction epiphysis. This end develops due to the pull of tendon of muscle attached to that end, and this epiphysis does not articulate with other bones. This epiphysis only provide place for the attachment of tendon of a muscle. Examples, the trochanters of femur and tubercles of humerus. Next one, atavistic epiphysis. These epiphyses are independent bone in other animals, but in human these bones fused with a neighboring bone. Example, the coracoid process of scapula and lateral tubercle of talus. And the next, aberrant epiphysis. It does not present always. It is an unusual epiphysis. This type of epiphyses are found in head of first metacarpal and at the base of other metacarpals. The next one, diaphysis. It is the shaft of long bone which is made up of compact bone as cortex and have a medullary cavity inside. The next part is metaphysis. The ends of diaphysis which attaches to epiphysis are called metaphysis. The metaphysis is the zone of active growth. They are active in growth before the epiphyseal fusion, which is fusion of epiphysis with diaphysis. The metaphysis is supplied with blood through periosteal and nutrient artery. These arteries will form hairpin-like endings in metaphysis. This makes metaphysis more prone to osteomyelitis. But after the completion of ossification, that is fusion of epiphysis with the diaphysis, these arteries will join each other and form anastomosis, and there won't be any endings later. Next, the epiphyseal growth plate. It is an hyaline cartilage plate present between diaphysis and epiphysis of an young bone. The bone will grow in length by proliferation of cells in this cartilaginous plate. Now let's see the blood supply of an long bone. The different part of a long bone is supplied by different arteries. First one is nutrient artery. This artery will enter through shaft of a long bone in oblique direction. This crosses the cortex and enter medullary cavity. There it divides into ascending and descending branches. These branches will divide into a number of small parallel arteries which ends in the metaphysis. The nutrient artery ends in metaphysis by anastomosing with other arteries like epiphyseal artery, metaphyseal artery and periosteal artery. The nutrient artery supplies the medullary cavity and 2/3 part of inner cortex and metaphysis part of a long bone. Then one more important features of nutrient artery is this will enter the shaft in the direction which is away from the growing end. The direction of nutrient artery in long bones can be remembered by small tips that in the upper limb the direction of nutrient artery will be towards the elbow, and in the lower limb the direction of nutrient artery will be away from the knee. The point which I mentioned now are about the nutrient artery. From this concept you can find the growing end of long bones. Let's see in upper limb. The direction of nutrient artery is towards the elbow. That means the growing end of humerus is upper end and the growing end of radius and ulna is lower end. In lower limb the nutrient artery direction is away from the knee. Then the growing end of femur is lower end and the growing end of tibia and fibula is upper end. Next, the periosteal artery. This is the artery which supplies periosteum, and under the periosteum they divide and enter the Walkman's canal present in the cortex to supply the outer 1/3 portion of the cortex. The next one, epiphyseal artery. It is artery which supplies epiphysis and are derived from periarticular vascular arcades. The non-articular surface of epiphysis contain many foramens. Only few of these foramens are for arterial entry. The remainings are for veins which are coming out from the bones. Metaphyseal arterial supply. These arteries will enter the metaphysis directly from neighboring system vessel. They will anastomosis with other arteries. Now, other than long bones, in short bones they are supplied by numerous periosteal vessels, and these vessels will enter the bone through non-articular surface of the short bones. In irregular bones like vertebrae, the body is supplied by anterior spinal artery and posterior spinal artery. These are special blood vessels for the vertebrae. The vertebral arch is supplied by a large vessel which enters through the base of transverse process. The bone marrow of vertebrae is drained by two large veins, that is basivertebral veins. Next, the ribs. The rib is supplied by nutrient artery and periosteal artery, and the nutrient artery will enter the rib just behind the tubercle of the ribs. Now let's see the development and ossification of bones. The bone is a connective tissue which is derived from mesodermal cells in the embryonic stage. These mesodermal cells will form the structure of bone, and later they convert into bones by ossification. This ossification is two types. First one, intramembranous or mesenchymal ossification. That is, the direct ossification of mesodermal models into bones is intramembranous ossification. That is, the mesodermal cells will arrange in the form of bones and they are directly converted into bones by ossification, that is, deposition of calcium in the matrix of these connective tissues. The bones formed in this way are called membrane bones. The next one is intracartilaginous ossification or endochondral ossification. In this type, the mesodermal model is first form a cartilaginous stage during the second month of intrauterine life. This formation of cartilage is called chondrification. Later, after the birth, cartilaginous model will be replaced by bones by endochondral ossification. The bones formed by this type of ossification is called cartilaginous bone. Ossification is nothing but deposition of calcium in the matrix of the connective tissue by osteoblast cells. The ossification occurs in two centers. There are primary centers and secondary centers. Now let's see some features and difference between primary center and secondary centers. Primary centers will form the diaphysis. Secondary centers will form epiphysis. Primary centers appears before the birth and the secondary centers will appear after the birth. The primary centers will appear during the 8th week of intrauterine life, and the secondary centers will appear during the childhood and puberty, with exception of lower end of femur and upper end of tibia. These two ends will appear during the 9th month of intrauterine life. After the formation of primary and secondary center and the development, the fusion of diaphysis and epiphysis starts at puberty and complete by the age of 25 years. This fusion is called epiphyseal fusion. After this fusion of bone, there won't be any further growth of the bone. Now let's see the law of ossification. This law states that secondary centers of ossification which appear first are last to unite, except the lower end of fibula. The end of a long bone where epiphyseal fusion occurs later is called the growing end of the bone. Now listen carefully. The first point says that epiphyseal end which starts ossify first will fuses with the shaft late, that is last, and the epiphyseal end which starts ossifying second will fuses with the shaft before, that is earlier. From this we can found that the end of long bone which fuses last with the shaft is called the growing end of the bone. Now there is a question for you. How will you make the hard strong bone into a soft flexible bone? Find the technique which used to make the bone soft. Now the answer for the question which I asked you in the previous video. Why the flexor aspect of upper and lower limb are in opposite direction? During the development of embryo, the limb buds will develop into upper and lower limb. During this development, the upper limb rotates laterally so that the elbow faces posterior and the flexor muscle faces anteriorly. Then the lower limb rotates medially so that the knee faces anterior and the flexor muscles goes to the posterior aspect. This is the reason why the flexor and extensor aspect of upper and lower limb are in opposite direction. Thank you friends.